So this is a panel called Organizing for Social Change, which obviously we've got lots of people who are involved in it, but we have a panel of speakers who have a perspective based on many years of experience, and I think that it's helpful for all of us to hear that, just to inform our own discussions and our own actions. So I'm going to start with Ken Lewenza Jr. He's from Making Waves in the Windsor Health Coalition, and so turn over to Ken. Thanks, Ken.
Good morning, everyone. Honest to goodness, Natalie didn't bring me here to talk about her, but it's almost impossible to begin my remarks without complimenting Natalie and Kim for the outstanding work that they've been able to do in terms of helping, by the sounds of it, not just Windsor Essex, but obviously all of you. I also want to touch base because I think it's relevant. Natalie wrote a report for the Ontario Common Front that talks about the backslide, about the widening inequality gap in Ontario. And it essentially just says that if you look at what's happening to jobs, if you look at what's happening to public services, democracy, the environment, things seem to be obviously going backwards. So we need to start thinking about, despite the enormous responsibility to fight on behalf of healthcare, that we have to actually start thinking about how we can come together with different groups and start thinking about how we can magnify all of our issues and try to find some points of convergence to actually get us all working together. So Natalie, I just want to say a great job on the report. I think it was fantastic. I want to talk about Windsor for a second. Amazing job. If you just look at, I don't know if you can see there on the screen there, what you'll see there is about 4,000 people in a room that were brought out to a healthcare coalition. It's almost impossible to not recognize Unifor, my union, for the outstanding work that they did in helping to finance that type of organizing and mobilization. The retirees were absolutely fantastic. Getting 4,000 people into a room certainly doesn't happen by just putting a call out. That came about by actually reaching out into the community, calling members, telling them to come out. And I think Natalie will remember that day that there was probably about 2,000 people that couldn't get into the hall because it was packed. So we didn't anticipate having that type of support, but it does go to show the type of potential that you can accomplish when you organize really well. The Health Coalition, again, I want to say, you're going to see the very next slide is the brochure. That might look a little bit familiar to you, but we made some adjustments to it in Windsor Essex. But again, without Natalie and the Healthcare Coalition support, we wouldn't have been able to put out that type of infrastructure and information to get things moving. We wanted to make sure from a Healthcare Coalition's perspective that when we went into the election, that it wasn't just about Harper and the $36 billion. We all certainly understand that if we were to cut $36 billion from our healthcare system, what type of implications that would have had all throughout. But essentially we said, how do we take this as an opportunity to build our healthcare coalition, to build something that's more cumulative, that after the election we would actually come out of this a bit stronger. And when I talk about partnerships again, even the Windsor District Labour Council, they were the ones that actually funded 25,000 of these leaflets to put door to door in our community to simply get the word out. But one of the things that we did that was really interesting was when we handed this out, we asked people, what is it that they can do? So I was saying to the organizers that ran this event, you know, very often we host big events, big ceremonial events, and we bring people out and we get them mad and we get them angry. But when they go home, they're frustrated, but sometimes they don't know what to do. And we recognize that people, based on what's happening in their lives, can only do certain things. So we really tried to adjust what it was in our campaign to fit people's time, interest, and comfort level. And we asked people, you know, would you sign a vote promise pledge so that, you know, at least that's something you can do to make sure that you make healthcare an issue in this election. And then we also asked people, would you ever consider handing out 50 to 100 leaflets on your street, thinking about, again, how we can build that type of capacity so that we don't have to rebuild it all the time, that we can count and go back to those people when we need them again in the future. We asked them, would you attend a town hall or an informational or a press conference in your neighborhood? Would you ever attend a town hall? Would you attend an educational on healthcare? Would you be interested in being a part of the healthcare coalition? And it provided check marks. And so essentially coming out of that, we actually left those types of meetings with a whole host of check marks that we can actually go back to, thinking about how those people can make a contribution to our healthcare coalitions. If we can just go down a couple slides, I just want to share with you, if you can get to the picture of Marco. He's an OECTA member. Yeah, that's the picture. And the reason why I have a picture of Marco with those residents is because it's kind of an interesting story. Again, when we put out lists asking people what is it that they can do to fit their time, interest, comfort level, Marco was an OECTA member who's never been active, never been involved in politics at all before. In fact, I had no idea. We went and knocked on doors, and I told Marco, the whole concept was that we would go on into a small neighborhood, and we would knock on doors and we would say that we're going to have a healthcare coalition informational on the street. And the interesting part about that was when we knocked on doors, whether there was a conservative sign, whether there was a liberal sign, a New Democrat sign, a green sign, the interesting part was you really couldn't tell party politics. People across all party lines were frustrated about the attacks that were happening on publicly funded healthcare. But going back to Marco again, that was the first time that Marco ever knocked on doors. I had no idea. I said, you know, Marco, it's probably going to take us about half an hour to an hour to get about 30 or so people out for like an informational on the street. And we were out there for 4 hours. And when he was finished, the one thing that was interesting, and I think all of you would agree, that talking about healthcare isn't like talking about party politics. Everyone has their story about healthcare, so it simply allowed people to basically talk. So if we can go to the next, just before I go to the neighborhood, the next picture there, we put out about 1,000 signs into our region, and again, I think we could have did a much better job with this, but again, it's all about building capacity. But we went through 1,000 signs relatively quickly, and we even asked people, would you be interested in paying $5 to put a sign on your lawn that says that you're voting for publicly funded health care? So we actually put some of those pictures of people on our website where people were just doing little small things to say that they were fighting for publicly funded health care. And then the very next picture is, and again to the union members, this is really kind of interesting. When you knocked on some of the doors, you found that some of our members, whether they were OECTA members, OSSTF members, QP members, they were in neighborhoods and we were having conversations about these types of issues. And I can say that it was interesting because if we could get them to engage and think about how that they could start to participate in a deeper way, and this is about the type of work that we do. So we did identify some union members that were never at all interested or involved in their union before, that are now thinking about how it is that I can participate, whether it's in my union, whether it's in the local healthcare coalition. And each time that we went and did one of these streets or neighborhoods, we also identified capacity, where people said that I would be interested in volunteering in the future. If you need help handing out leaflets, if you need this or that, it was very, that was something we learned as well. If I can go to the, there's a picture of a street meeting there. Yeah. So this was kind of really interesting, the strategy that we used. We basically said, you know, we're not going to bring in activists into your neighborhood. We're not going to bring signs and, you know, let's not just go out and protest in front of MPs' offices. Let's have the conversations. So once again, the conversations at the door were so meaningful, they were relevant, they were rich. But then again, we followed that up with meetings on the street talking about healthcare. And then if you go to the next two, you'll see a picture of Ken Brown. He's a former retiree of Unifor. He's the co-chair of our healthcare coalition. And again, he was just talking about what's happening. Rick Reham here, again, he just has a personal story. He was a longtime activist in our community. went in to have 2 fingers amputated because of diabetes, didn't leave the hospital for about 18 months after. When he did leave the hospital, he left with his legs amputated, and basically what we were talking about, and Rick is still active and very involved in the community, is that if Rick lived in the United States, he probably wouldn't be around today. He certainly wouldn't be allowed to go back to his home where he was able to go back to. He likely would have lost those types of things when you think about what those types of expenses would have cost in the United States. And then we also had a picture of Donna Longmore. Again, just sharing her personal stories, again, experiences with what we were doing on the street was obviously very positive and helped us build. And so I'm just going to transition a little bit about the thoughts about organizing that we're thinking about moving forward. Even now after this election, we're thinking about how do we take issues into neighborhoods, into people's living rooms, invite the press, have small authentic groups, and actually let people know that this is how you can actually plug into your local healthcare coalition. We're then thinking about how do we move to like our town hall-based meetings again, so that we can have all of the rich conversations that again people are saying here about how we should be concerned, thinking about how we can move forward. And then from there, again, when you think about hosting these events, what do people do? And the reality is, it's amazing seeing people here today that are committed on the weekends to fight for healthcare. But I think it's already been mentioned, we're in a war. And this is an ongoing war. And we're going to obviously have to double, triple, and quadruple our base, thinking about how we're going to have to fight for healthcare. So we've been working with Natalie, thinking about how is it after we have a town hall that we can provide educational opportunities so that people they can learn about how we won publicly funded healthcare. They can learn about some of the attacks. They can build their confidence. They can build their leadership so that, again, they feel confident to actually be more relevant to the process. And again, the thought process, too, is the only way that we can actually start to go on offense, where we can start advocating for a pharmacare program and those types of things, is if we build that type of base. And I ask people to think for a second about your transformative moment. I mean, how you first got involved. Just think about that within your own mind for a second, and think within your own local community. How do people know that the Healthcare Coalition exists? How do they know that this is an open place where they can come in and participate? And I guess that really is some of the things that we have to think about, because the reality is if we can't provide people a transformative moment that makes them appreciate that they're welcome, that this is important, that this speaks to their circumstance, the reality is we won't be able to build our base. And then last point I just want to touch on, which I thought we did was really interesting. Some people might be hearing about a program called Nation Builder. And it actually allows us to better identify your base. It's a computer program. So what it actually allows you to do is, when you go from fight to fight, it becomes more cumulative. You don't have to go back and rebuild your base again. The one thing interesting in Windsor, and I wish I could have showed it to you today if we were on the internet, is that each person that signed on to our Vote Promise Pledge, each person that said I would hand out leaflets, each person that said I would come to a meeting, we actually have that data mapped. So I could pinpoint an area in my community where we have the highest concentration of people that said, yes, I would come to a meeting. If we needed to hand out a leaflet tomorrow on healthcare or any other issue, we could actually just pinpoint the people that said that they would hand out leaflets. We want to get to the point where some people don't have a lot of time and they got busy lives, but they still want to make a contribution. So maybe they can hand out 50 to 100 leaflets in their neighborhood and building that type of capacity. And I know Natalie has raised the fact that we did this in Windsor when we had the thoracic care. We actually had a vote where we asked people in the community to come in and vote to restore services. And now what we're talking about is how per every 1,000 homes can we drop off leaflets? Can we allow people in that little neighborhood to go and vote? And the thought process is, how do we actually bring democracy closer to people? How do we create new spaces, new avenues, things that allow people to do something? I guess Marshall Gans, a really popular organizer in the United States, said that if you can't get people to do something, they're not yours. I think so you got to get people to do something. And to the union members, to the union leaders, I'd like to say this in the crowd. I heard a comment saying that unions can do a much better job. I agree 100% that the strength of our union isn't just the ability to write checks and support these types of campaigns. The strength of our union is actually our members. Our members live in the community. And when I think about participating in membership meetings over the years, I would think that, how do you make these more interesting? Because it's not exactly a place where you take someone to a first date. And I start thinking, how do you make it more interesting? And then you start realizing that, there's going to be a whole swath of people that don't see what happens in a membership meeting as being 95% relevant to their life. But we should be asking our members, what is it that you can do that fits in your time, interest, comfort level? Are you concerned about what's happening to hydro? Are you concerned what's happening to the environment? Are you concerned what's happening to healthcare? Here's how you can plug in. And I think about people that sit in the back row at a membership meeting, you don't really feel that relevant. You don't feel like your contribution is that meaningful. And the nice part about participating in a local healthcare coalition is that you do feel like the work that you're doing is meaningful. You do feel like you're relevant. And if we can actually get more people to experience democracy or participating and feeling relevant, we can certainly make a much better difference. I want to say the local healthcare coalition, where I see some huge opportunities, is it allows, for example, to break down barriers even between unions. Unions will say, oh, we have solidarity with one another. You'll have QP, you'll have Steel, you'll have Unifor. We all represent workers in the healthcare sector. And I think the Healthcare Coalition provides an awesome opportunity for all the different unions to actually come together, drop the banners, and just simply saying, this is the fight that we're fighting together. So I'll close off my remarks. I just want to thank Natalie and Kim so much. Because the reality is we couldn't have accomplished what we did in Windsor, Essex the way we did it without you. And I gotta say, this is really cool too. Tracy Ramsey, who got elected, was a member of, not just a member of Unifor, but she was a member of the Healthcare Coalition. She was one knocking on doors to save thoracic care. And I know that the Healthcare Coalition says, we're nonpartisan. And it's important to remain nonpartisan because there's a lot of people that hold conservative values that support publicly funded healthcare. In Windsor, Essex, for example, in Essex, we had an MP, conservative MP, Jeff Watson, just antagonized every single progressive issue, no matter what it was. When Tracy began that campaign, she was 5,000 votes down. And I can tell you that she won because she's amazing. But she actually won by 4,000 votes. So if you think of the trend that was happening across the country in terms of the Liberal sweep, and you think of how she closed the gap from 5,000 votes to winning by 4,000 votes, that doesn't happen without a lot of groups collaborating and cooperating together. And you know, you can't, there's no one single group that you could say they're responsible for helping her get elected. It really was truly a true community initiative, and all different groups coming together and working together. So she's going to be a big supporter of healthcare, and it's great. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. That was a wonderful fight, actually. I'm going to get Natalie to come up and talk next. Need no introduction. Thank you.
Okay. So I asked Ken to come and speak, and Antoni too, because they are organizers who work really closely with the Ontario Health Coalition, who really have done some extraordinary things in terms of actually organizing and building real capacity in communities and among organizations to work together to move forward an agenda of social justice broadly, of equity, of improved services and equality, essentially. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I think, the lessons that we have learned in the Health Coalition, that I've learned in my experience too, because we are kind of known as one of the coalitions that actually is an organizing coalition. And the reason that we have the political power that we do have, and we're known well among the top tiers of government in Ontario, and when we go with pregnant women especially, that helps to Queen's Park and hold media conferences, you know, they all start freaking out and worrying about what's going on. And when we go door to door in communities, the MPPs worry that, you know, that their actual seats are in jeopardy if they don't do something about this. And so when the Health Coalition started in the 1990s, early 1990s, the first sort of coordinators were really sort of focused on getting the board together. And then in the late 1990s till 1995 to about 2000, worked with some local communities to build some local health coalitions. When I started in 2000, we really wanted to develop an actual movement of people that actually could move thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people that would actually have political power. We understand that the default in healthcare is that they will privatize it. So that is the trajectory we're on. Unless we stop them, that's what's going to happen. We also understand that the vast majority of people, as I think Rolf was talking about, are on our side. We have the support of the majority. So our fight here is to make the public opposition to cuts and privatization visible, to build the kind of resistance that politicians can't ignore, and to be able to have enough power to overcome a very well-heeled, well-organized set of lobby groups on the other side. Al, you were talking about, you know, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, the bond rating agencies who are using their very manipulative tactics to force the Ontario government to deepen and continue with an austerity agenda that is an agenda of the deepest cuts to public services in the country, right? That's who we're up against there. And the P3 hospitals, it's the multinational financial industry. You know, it's like the fight against Hydro One, where you know you have the vast majority of people on your side, but you have a government that is now very controlled by TD Bank, where there are, you know, very well-heeled interests who are going to make money, and a lot of money, from the privatization of that public asset or service. And what you have to do is figure out, how do you move that overwhelming public opinion? How do you make it visible? How do you build resistance that cannot be ignored, that supersedes the power of those people? That essentially is the situation that we're in. We're in it kind of permanently. And so the lessons that I've learned from the very beginning were that we needed to develop methods by which we could get people to actually do community organizing. And the more actually that the internet has taken over, the more difficult this has become, because locally folks are very happy to just send out an email, right? And that's it. So even just to get people to make phone calls anymore is very difficult. But you and I both know that nobody comes if they don't get the direct ask. If we hold a protest, if people don't get the phone call or aren't approached person to person to person, they're not coming. And people are putting more hours than ever into the workplace. Most families have 2 income earners. One is working full-time or overtime, one is working at least part-time, in order to be able to move people to do things. And people have grown used to diminishing returns, frankly. They're used to cuts. It's been happening for a long time. They're used to job losses. People have lower expectations. And so we need to bring both the urgency and the hope. The fact is we do save services all the time, entire hospitals. You know, there would be dozens of rural hospitals closed in Ontario were it not for the Ontario Health Coalition. We are the group that stands between is that we've organized, 10 different giant rallies in Queensburg. We've organized cross-province hearings at which, literally hundreds of people have made submissions. We've brought those to government. We've held press conferences. We actually organize human beings. So when we go into this afternoon and we talk about our action plan, we need to figure out an action plan that actually involves deep community organizing. We're going to talk about a referendum to stop the cuts to the hospitals. We've now had 8 years of cuts to hospitals in Ontario, and they're not stopping. I fear that the local hospitals, a number of them will just not, Trenton, Picton, Wallaceburg, Petrolia, a whole number of them just will not survive 2 more years of cuts. It's not going to be possible. And even places like Leamington, Chatham-Kent, the next tier up, are going to be devastated in the next round of cuts that are coming over the next few months. And as you know, every single service that's cut is privatized. So we need to gird ourselves. We need to build a movement that actually moves human beings in the way that Ken talks about. We need a movement that reflects our communities, the diversity of our communities, in the way that Antoni is going to talk about a little bit as part of what he talks about with a common friend. I asked Pooja, you and Carolina, is that Carolina? How do I say your name? Katrina, okay, to come from Ottawa because Pooja came to a public meeting and as a young person was really interested. I thought it would be great if we could develop the leadership of younger people by shadowing them with a local coalition co-chair. So we never would do a media conference without you speaking at it. We need to develop another tier of leadership so that we show some more diversity in age and also so that not everybody working in our movement has been around for 30 years and has lost the ambition to win. No, I'm kidding. But has the ambition to sort of move forward in a different way, right? That youth brings. And so we need to think about that when we're organizing. At the very beginning, in 2000, my great friend Stan Raper, who organized with the farm workers in Canada, I don't know, who here has heard of Cesar Chavez? Right, so Obama's campaign in the United States was very much inspired by the work of the farm workers, and they used to hold backyard meetings. And in those meetings, they would identify, just by talking with people and looking at how they responded to things, they would identify the skills that the different people brought to the group. And they would ask everybody if they would take on just concrete things, like Ken has done with the flyer, in which, I don't know if you have, it's too late, but in which they gave a checklist of things on the back of the federal election flyer, like this, that asked people to check off. I agree to sign the pledge. I will be voting. I'll speak to a family member. I'll consider purchasing a sign for $5 and putting it on my lawn. I'll agree to deliver 100 leaflets in my community. If we held a press conference in their neighborhood, I'll join in that press conference, etc. So same kind of model, right? And so inspired by the farm workers, we did a door-to-door campaign under the when the Romano Commission was around. And we reached 300,000 households door-to-door. It was amazing. We got petitions signed. That was the ask at that time. We delivered them to Roanoke. Since then, we've held a number of plebiscites or referendums to stop the P3 hospitals first, and then to stop the private clinics. In both cases, we changed public policy fundamentally. In Ontario, we've rolled back the amount of privatization in the P3s in a way that has not happened in any other jurisdiction that I've ever been able to find. So in the first P3 hospitals, for example, in Brampton and Ottawa, about 400 jobs were privatized. This is just to give you a quantification of about half the hospital, all the support services below, all bound into those contracts. In the new P3s, which are bad, they cost a fortune, $8 billion too much, all that stuff. The financiers are still making off like bandits, but the amount of privatization in the deals has shrunk. It's only the shell maintenance. It's like less than 10 jobs per new hospital. That's the rollback in privatization that we achieved with the plebiscites on the P3 hospitals. Essentially, they said to us, what do we need to do to get you to go away? I mean, literally, that was the meeting with the ministry, sorry. Second plebiscite on the private clinics, and as I told you earlier, the minister, assured me that he was standing in the way of moving forward the private clinics. So those kinds of deep community organizing, the local leaders of the local coalitions who have become municipal leaders, Elaine McDonald, for example, Ross Sutherland, who are on their municipal councils. There's about, I don't know, a dozen or so local coalition co-chairs, moving the politics of our local communities by actual direct democracy is critical to actually wielding political power that's going to save public health care in this province and in this country. And so this afternoon, can we make this part of our discussion? How can we build in these kinds of organizing tools so that we are a force that politicians have to worry about, that they have to contend with, and they know, just like Harper knew, that if he was to touch health care, if he was to overtly try to touch health care, that he would not be able to survive politically in this country, and that's what we need to keep on. Thank you.
And our last speaker on the panel is Antoni Shelton, who has a long history of activism and we're now at the Ontario Common Front. Okay. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ross.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll make my comments this morning, or this afternoon now, fairly brief. I know I'm standing in the way of lunch. But I really wanted to make this appearance today because when Natalie calls, you come, right? When Natalie calls, you respond. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for not only Natalie, of course, but the Ontario Health Care Coalition. And like so many people, I want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of all of us across this province in terms of helping to preserve and build our most cherished universal healthcare system. I'm in a lot of pain this morning, to be honest with you. I have a back brace on, and I'm taking very strong painkillers. I was involved in a car accident very recently, and it brought home to me in a very direct way, that we'll never know when we will need our healthcare system. And so we just live from day to day hoping that it'll be there for us when we need it. But of course, what Natalie is talking about, and Ken, is it won't necessarily be there unless we are actively involved and engaged in ensuring that it is not packaged and sold off to the highest bidder. In so many ways, what I wanted to talk to you about is the connection between the Healthcare Coalition and the Ontario Common Front. It is a coalition that was born in Ontario in 2012. It's a coalition of labor and community. It's a coalition that was actually, its first assembly happened right here in this church. when you talk about organizing this particular church, if the walls could speak, I think all we would have to do is listen. I've been to meetings here in terms of organizing meetings, and listened to Colombian activists, and the next thing I knew, I was in the jungle in Colombia. This is what can happen in this place. The Common Front was born in this place in 2012, and we've continued as a coalition to try and bring to the forefront issues of growing inequality in Ontario. Natalie has been a key part in the coalition, Ontario Health Coalition of the Common Front. As you may know, we've just released a report last Thursday, an update called Backslide in Ontario that Natalie authored for us along with the research team. Thank you, Natalie. It's a fantastic report. And yes. Toronto Star calls that the most seminal report that's been done on labor restructuring in Ontario for decades. Yeah. And before that, in August 2012, again with Natalie's help, we released Falling Behind, which was a comprehensive report putting inequality on the map in Ontario, and it was picked up by all the main media in the province, and it also went nationally. When we get right down to it, those reports tell a very grave story in terms of where we're at today. They tell a story, for example, of the fact that, over the last 20 or 30 years, at least in the last generation, we've seen the corporate sector, particularly the average CEO, their income rise 204 times greater than the average income of a worker. 204 times. In previous generations, the average CEO income was only 24 times an average worker. So in our generation, we've seen this huge disparity grow up between some Canadians and others. We also know in Ontario, as the recent report points out, that 1/3 of our workers are working at minimum wage. Many of them working even below minimum wage if you're a student or you're in the food and beverage industry. 1/3 of our workers. So, as we look at some of these statistics, and one of them, of course, that resonates for the Common Front, particularly in the healthcare, is that Ontario ranks last in the whole country in terms of per capita expense on social programs. We are dead last. So we'll hear a lot of politicians, including our current premier, want to, tell us about how well we're doing and how fortunate we should feel for the programs that she's seeking to bring about. But we know that at the end of the day, we're still operating under an austerity fiscal framework. And that austerity fiscal framework means that average Canadians are paying the price for the economic downturn that has happened since 2008. That means that corporate tax cuts are continuing in this province at the lowest rate throughout any jurisdiction in North America. We have the lowest corporate tax rate while our social programs are being cut. How can that be fair? Well, in the Common Front, these are the issues we're highlighting, and they're resonating with people, I've got to tell you. Because like others have talked about, in terms of our organizing, we've had success. I'm standing here today, when we were standing here in 2012, founding the Common Front, there was a guy called Harperman that was in Ottawa. And, the world under Harperman looked very bleak. Well, he's not there today. And, and we have to take credit for that. We have to take credit for that. All of us in our own ways, in our organizations and individually, we knew that we needed to get rid of Front.min and his supporters in Ottawa, and we did that. And now we can begin to, hopefully, to rebuild a lot of the damage that has happened. The Common Front has worked in areas like in London, Ontario. We have a Common Front chapter. They focused on saving door-to-door mail. That's been their big campaign. And you know what? There's another victory. It looks like we're going to get our door-to-door preserved. And we're going to take credit for that. That was organizing. Average Canadians, you know, they came out and they sat on concrete pads and said, no super boxes are not going on my street, in my neighborhood. People like us, organizers, everyday people did that. I also want to talk about the minimum wage campaign, because that's something that we've been very involved in. And, you know, we haven't gotten, you know, entirely what we want, which is a living wage. But we have moved the province towards indexing minimum wage to inflation. So at least every year, those who are living on minimum wage don't have to wait for the bosses to decide whether they get an increase in terms of their minimum wage or the government of the day. At least they will get that, you know, 1% or 2% of cost of living every year. We did that. We know how important and significant that is for people living on minimum wage. We know that. And you know, I finally want to begin to wrap up by saying that in terms of the Common Front and the organizing that we've been doing, we face many challenges, just like any active organization, like the Coalition. You know, the 90 groups, at the end of the day, the 90 groups, it's more or less 50-50 labor-community partnership. You know, if you go back to the days of action and days of protest, people remember those days. We had that kind of coalition of labor and community take to the streets to fight back the Harris agenda, right? That coalition fell apart after the days of action. There was a lot of people who wanted to see the days of action continue and that partnership because of the successes that we had and the mobilization that we had in the streets. It didn't continue, you know, and some didn't want it to continue, and others were very disappointed that it didn't continue, and there was, you know, there was a lot of, you know, discord to some extent. And so the labor community activism that is so important in our society wasn't at the level that we needed it to be. Also, we had the Ontario Coalition of Social Justice, which was a vibrant organization that is now defunct. The Ontario Common Front has kind of picked up the pieces of those initiatives. So it's an umbrella organization that looks to include, to be inclusive of all groups and organizations, but particularly ensuring that we have at the table at least equity in terms of the representation of labor and community. And so we have a co-chair, one from labor, one from community. The labor councils across the province are very active and participate, as do provincially mandated community-based organizations. I just came, we know this week we're having the OFL convention, and I'm the staff to the Constitution Committee. There is a resolution being put forward that the Ontario Common Front Community Co-Chair be represented on the OFL Executive Council. So that is the kind of constitutional amendment we hope passes so that we can see a strengthening of that relationship and that alliance and coalition between labor and community. And so at the end of the day, I have to say we need to make sure that the organizing that's going on is resourced. You know, there is challenges in terms of resourcing the kind of work we're doing. So I can say that in terms of labor on our side, you know, this is why this resolution is going forward, along with resolutions to help to fund this work. And so we have locals, labor councils who will be fighting on the floor at the OFL convention to support this kind of work. You know, in past years, the support level hasn't been what we would like it to be, but we hope to change that going forward. So I just want to wrap up by saying that, you know, at the end of the day, we've made a number of changes that have been victories since 2012. We really see what's happened in Ottawa, what's happened on a local level in terms of some of these campaigns, as proof that our work has had an impact. And we're going to continue the fight. Obviously, we need the ongoing support of the coalition of Natalie. I would hope that in the future, not just the Common Front, but the Health Coalition has a seat on the Executive Council. I think that what we're moving towards in Labour is a broader inclusive participation in terms of this model of Labour and community working together, as you heard from previous speakers. So thank you very much for giving me the time today.